IVM.
Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast supported by Pragati, a flagship media initiative of the Takshashila Institution. We're a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like to bring a fresh perspective to Indian affairs and an Indian perspective to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello, this is Megha Pardhi. I'm research analyst at the Takshashila Institution. In today's episode of All Things Policy, we are discussing Takshashila's newly published Techno-Strategic Doctrine for India. To discuss this doctrine, we have with us today my colleagues Arjun Gargeyas and Pranav R Satyanath, our research analysts at Takshashila, and they work with high-tech geopolitics programming. Welcome Arjun, welcome Pranav.
Hey Megha, thank you so much for having us.
Hi Megha, thank you very much, ma'am.
Yeah, so without, wasting much time, I'm really excited about this actually. Can you tell our listeners about this doctrine and just, overview of what is this document about? Arjun, let's start with you.
Thanks Megha. Yeah, so basically what this doctrine is about is the fact that how technology is shaping national strategy itself and how technology can be used as a medium or a tool for building India's national interests and actually achieving India's national goals. So if we look at the past, Takshashila also has come out with a national security doctrine and a space doctrine. So it is along those similar lines wherein the doctrine actually paves the way forward for how India should view technology in the 21st century and in the information age itself. So the doctrine is not it's mostly like a set of guidelines, or let's say the directive principles of state policy or whatever is in the Constitution of India. It's just a bunch of guidelines for the government and for the Indian state itself to approach technology from a more strategic realm. So we know that how technology has been playing a major role in different strategic areas, such as military, international relations, foreign policy, and how can India use emerging and critical technologies to achieve its goals in any realm, in its foreign policy realm, in its military endeavors, and everything else. So the doctrine itself is just a bunch of rules or guidelines, which includes the objectives and the approaches that need to be taken by the Indian state. But also it a bunch of things which explains how it can do it, such as there are different assets for India in the technology arena, which it can utilize to its advantage, as well as it has the different guidelines in terms of how it should approach R&D of technology, and also how it should kind of cater itself to the international cooperation realm. So how can it be a technology power in the international circles itself? So that is a basic, overview of the doctrine itself, but we can get into the specifics of it in terms of what exactly does it hope to achieve and what are its objectives and what are the approaches that can be taken by the Indian state.
I can give a more fun answer.
Yeah, Pranav, I was just coming to also.
Yeah, the more fun answer is, how Takshashila and our colleagues are producing a lot of work. Arjun himself and his co-authors have produced papers on AI chips, how India can, what India can do to ramp up silicon chip production and how it can utilize chips. So the thought was, how do we India wants to do a lot of things in the technology. It has the capacity to do a lot of things in some areas. But what are the principles that should drive this sort of innovation? So, Takshashila, like as Arjun said, Takshashila had produced something called a national security doctrine, will set the first principles for what should guide India's national security. And in the information age, national security, your social security, or your economic progress, everything is guided by your technological prowess. So the doctrine sets first principles on how we should think about technology and how should India be guided to pursue technological excellence. That's the most fun answer, because for a very long time, our colleagues have been thinking about what should India do about tech. And there's been so much conversation about tech. There are some first principles we're intuitively guided by. So we put all that in this doctrine and said, let's not let everyone follow this, and let this be something that let this be the guidelines that even the government tries to follow, and all the other policy analysts try to follow, so that we're all on the same page about how we think about it.
Interesting. So can I say that audience for this doctrine is policymakers as well as, other leaders in tech domain, and even anyone who is enthusiastic about technology and its implication for national strategy. Am I correct?
Yeah, it's for everyone. If anyone wants to work on technology policy, if anyone thinks about technology and what role tech can play in India, it is a guiding doctrine for. They can follow our other works, of course, but this is the foundation. This is the first principles on which we can build on a lot of our ideas.
Interesting. So what are the objectives in this doctrine? Pranav, can I start with you?
Yeah, the objective first and foremost is to use technology as a vehicle to establish India as a major power in the global order, right? We've seen throughout India's history that India has always not been a leader in any particular sector. It has not been able to achieve many of its objectives because of the lack of technology, or because it has been slow adopter of certain technologies. And Indian society, sometimes they adopt technologies too soon, where you have unanticipated effects on economic and societal level. So the objective is to understand how the objective here is to understand how we can use technology to make India a national power, because we are at that stage where some technologies like advantages in AI, advantages in artificial, advantages in manufacturing of very advanced chips, advantages in using digital platforms or open source platforms can help us leapfrog the other. It can make us an equivalent among all the other great powers or major powers like China, Russia, States. So one of the objectives is to use technology as a vehicle to leapfrog all the backlog that India has met in the past 3 or 4 decades. And this guides in the investment of technology, so that it helps in the public sector, it helps in the private sector industry grow, and most importantly, it helps India's social sector grow, which is also important. And by what we mean by social sector is it helps empower people, it safeguards their constitutional rights, and it ensures that people have their freedom. So technology should not be a barrier for freedom, but technology should be an enabler of freedom. And finally, we have issues like sustainability, climate change, reducing carbon emissions, and investing in technology such as batteries, advanced batteries, renewable energy are all very important to achieve sustainability, and which is also one of the objectives. And what I've spoken about is a gist of the objectives. The doctrine itself has 5 objectives. They're very easy to read. So what I've given is a gist of what the doctrine's objectives are.
This is very interesting, and because we know that how technology is right now currently a part of this major discourse in international relations, including Indian and Quad. We have focused quite a lot on critical and emerging technologies. So I think this doctrine was very timely. But objectives are very nice, but what I want to know about approaches, and because objectives are fine, but we also have to have some, approach towards achieving this objective, right? So Arjun, can you tell us more about the approaches to achieve this objectives as mentioned in this doctrine?
Yeah, sure, Megha. So as Pranav mentioned, right, we have a bunch of objectives that what the guiding principles are. So again, and he also mentioned how India has its own advantages and in the technology realm, especially in some sectors. So one of the approaches we have is to kind of utilize human capital as India's biggest strength, because in terms of the sheer size and the workforce of the country, there is a huge talent pool. And the fact is we kind of have to nurture it and make sure that they can contribute to critical technology sectors in a way that can achieve the objectives which we have set forth. Because until now, there are a lot of people who are skilled in certain domains. Maybe it's semiconductor design, maybe it's IT services, these kind of sectors have become India's comparative advantages. And most states from the West too have relied on Indian engineers and Indian technology workers to kind of like service their needs. So what we can do is to kind of build a talent pool for every kind of technology sector, which can be critical in the next decade or so. And that would kind of become India's biggest strength. And once we can do that through upskilling, through providing them the basic facilities and providing them with cutting edge research and development. And so this kind of development in terms of the technology sector itself can help build the existing human capital, which is already there in India right now. And that would kind of give India a leg up over other countries, because they would get that they would have many people working in different sectors, and they'll have many people contributing to these sectors. And in the end, they can always rely on their workforce to help them achieve their national strategic goals in the technology domain itself. And also the fact that India also believes in the concept of free trade in not just, goods and services in terms of technology, goods and services, but also the fact that there has to be a free movement of people, knowledge and capital across national boundaries. So because we have seen that there are different industries in different countries have been developed because of the fact that they've allowed human capital movement across different across borders. I already talked about this, I think, in the semiconductor trade episode, wherein I told how Taiwan actually built its own industry by actually getting or attracting American engineers to come work for them in their own country and help them build the industry itself. So India also advocates for this in terms of the fact that there has to be a movement of people, knowledge and capital across boundaries without actually having any kind of restrictions over there. So that's one thing. And also the fact that there has to be a proper governance framework. As Pranav said, right, one of the objectives of our doctrine is the fact that we empower citizens and safeguard constitutional rights through technology and or through the means of technology itself. So if technology cannot be governed properly, and the fact that this governance framework can actually not encourage research and development, or may have another negative consequence in terms of infringing of people's rights, there can be, the innovation drops, and the fact that it can kind of affect the way we look at technology. So there has to be proper governance frameworks, and India advocates for the fact that they would follow a set governance framework which is there for any kind of technology which is going to come up in the future or which is already present. And also, I think Pranav also touched upon this, the concept of open tech. So the whole concept of technology now has been more about the accessibility itself. So the fact that you need to kind of give access to more people, and technology cannot be a barrier itself. There cannot be an entry barrier to access a tech. So especially in India with a huge population, you kind of have to provide these services and accessibility to different people across the region itself. And like open technologies are a way to do that. The fact is you do not have any restrictions in terms of licensing, in terms of the fact that there can be any controls put on it, or there can be any IP rights which are being used. So open technologies can help in improving the accessibility of technology to different people. And it can also bring or digitize a country such as India in a much more easier way. So that's one of the things which we also have. And finally, in the era of, cyber warfare and information warfare, India should have kind of capabilities to address this entity. There will be a strategic and military angle to tech. I mean, if there is already a military angle to emerging technologies, and how there has been dual use technologies which are being developed both for civilian and military purposes. But now with increasing threats in the information domain, you kind of have to develop capabilities, both offensive and defensive, to deal with any kind of threats that might come up in the, let's say, in the near future. That's some of the approaches. I think Pranav can, delve into the others, which we also have.
Yeah, thank you so much. Let's take a break on here and we'll come back after the break and we'll talk more about the approaches to implement objectives from Techno-Strategic Doctrine.
Hello. It's been another great week here on the IVM Podcasts Network. On This Round is on Me, Gauri explores the power of networking with Abha Bakaya, founder and CEO of Ladies Who Lead. On Naan Curry, Sadaf and Archit go on a virtual food walk with Anubhav Sapra, founder of Delhi Food Walks. On Misconduct, Ragvi and Nisha tell us about the fascinating life story of China's only female empress, Wu Zetian. On The Longest Constitution, Priya analyzes the First Amendment to the Indian Constitution. And on Marathi Khidkitun, the Deshmukhs explore museums all around the world. We've got some exciting news for you. IVM Podcast has just launched its merch, and our first line is out now. Head to the IVM Podcast's website and click on the shop tab to check out our first collection of t-shirts. Do follow us on social media. We are IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And remember, if you're enjoying this show or any of our other shows for that matter, please do tell a friend. Also, don't forget to rate us on any platforms you're listening on. And you can also check us out on YouTube. We're also doing a small listener survey to better understand how you respond to our shows and advertising on the network. We would really appreciate it if you could spare a few minutes to fill it in. It helps us build better shows for you. And finally, we would like to thank our sponsors this week. SBI Life Insurance, Apne Liye, Apno Ke Liye. Jupiter, a digital banking app. Capgemini, get the future you want. Intel vPro, built for business. And Intel, future banao wonderful with Intel-powered laptops.
Welcome to All Things Policy. In today's episode, we are discussing, we had recently launched Takshashila's Techno-Strategic Doctrine for India. So we have with us today my colleagues Arjun and Pranav, and they are quite nicely explaining what this doctrine is about and how we are going to, and how India can benefit from having a policy dedicated for technology. So before the break, we talked about what's this doctrine, what are the objectives, and some of the approaches. Pranav, can you elaborate more on the approaches as described in the doctrine?
Yeah, Arjun gave a very interesting gist of all the objectives and what it aims to achieve. I just want to elaborate a little bit on the open technologies. It sort of went about deliberation. We in the office we deliberated about why open tech is important. Why is it more important for India than other countries? I think if you look at all proprietary software or proprietary hardware, the ARM architecture for semiconductors, or your software such as the Windows and Apple's own proprietary software, or any other software such as Android, which require licensing. Now, these are very powerful tools, but the cost of licensing for many Indian companies would be extremely high. So it would be a disadvantage for Indians to license this, pay upfront costs. And it's also very expensive for Indian companies themselves to start from scratch, start building their own proprietary software and compete in the international market, such that proprietary software have gained certain levels of monopoly. So open technology, open source technology allows you to source all of the talent, not only from India, from around the world, because it's open source technology at the end of the day is user innovation, right? Your users are contributing to the improvement of the software or the hardware. And you have collective knowledge that is being used to improve the tech. And you also have a support system that doesn't depend on one company. So in such, because of the advantages of open source technologies, it's easier for a large number of Indians to adopt, including in the social sectors that are hard to reach. So in the rural areas, open source technologies can be used to start innovating and in very early stages without waiting for gaining licenses or without waiting for having a patent. So one of the reasons is if India develops this open source technologies, we will be able to overcome some of the hindrances that is created by big tech or by the intellectual property system that restricts the access to some technologies, right? So that is one of the objectives. And picking off from access, I'll just talk about international diplomacy and international cooperation, because that's one thing that I'm always interested in. For a very long time, historically, going back to the early ages of nuclear tech, India was denied technology by the non-proliferation regimes, right? Your nuclear access to nuclear technology was guaranteed so long as countries could make certain trade-offs. That is, in the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty said, if countries agree to give up their nuclear weapons ambitions or national security ambitions, then nuclear technology will be made available to them. So for India, this was a technology denial regime because India still has grave concerns of national security coming from both Pakistan and China. But also India had this objective of using nuclear power to really provide electricity across the countries and provide fundamental research in terms of medicine. So learning from this, I think the Indian objective should never be to be one of those players who restricts technology access to other countries. India's international cooperation in any sector should be aimed at not only widening access of tech to India, but also making sure that this tech reaches to the rest of the world, so that India's own objectives at home is also at some level followed in international relations. So I think in the future, we should think about, how do you make space technology available? How is it that we standardize regulation, how we impose standards in space so that there's equal access to everyone? This should be one of the aims, and this is one of the approaches that we have set for us, that India should widen access in terms of not only raw technology, but also raw materials and human resources, because human capital, the free flow of human capital, as Arjun mentioned, can yield miracles like Taiwan. The story of TSMC, for example, is very, very interesting because you had an American engineer who went to Taiwan. He was incentivized by the government, and the company was set up. Now it has a near monopoly over manufacturing of semiconductor tech. So this is one of our objectives, is to have international cooperation such that technology access and its associated resources are also widely available. And then we have about technology regulation itself. We've seen in the United Nations and in India itself to talk about data protection, cybersecurity, enforcement of people's rights, so that minority rights, for example, is not taken away because of social media bubbles. So India should adopt a framework such that it protects people's rights, and you have a data protection law. You have a set of data protection laws to protect people's data rather than make use of them as a tool for state oppression. So what I'm trying to say is that India wants to do a lot of things with tech, opposite to what China might be doing in terms of protecting people's data and how technology guides people's lives. I'm not an expert on data protection laws. Takshashila has produced works about the data protection bill and written a lot about localization of data. So these are some of the principles that we must follow. That firstly, technology should not infringe on people's freedoms. The state should not use technology as the invisible hand to curb freedoms, but rather it should do everything possible to widen people's freedoms, make sure people have the freedoms guaranteed by the Constitution. The state will place laws such that it does what the Constitution says.
Thank you so much, Pranav. One or two points, kind of stood out for me. First was approaches. It was about information warfare. The doctrine states that India will possess top 10 capabilities for information warfare. And I think this is very important, as Arjun also explained when he was speaking about it. Because you see, this is, again, at the cost of repeating myself, I'll say this is the information age. And irrespective of what we see, what has been seen in the Ukraine war, and the people were expecting a lot more of cyber activities during this Ukraine-Russia war, and still it is not as expected. Even then, I would say that information warfare is going to be a very crucial element of national security in this century. So India having those capabilities, and not just capabilities, but top tier capabilities is very important, especially the way we are digitizing and trying to, add a networked or interconnected capabilities in all aspects of our life. So I think that stood out for me, and that was a very important point. Then on the open source technology point, I remember India has dabbled in this field before. I remember reading that India had tried to develop its own, indigenous operating system. I think it was called Bharat Operating System or Indus OS, something like that. I call it, or it was both actually, but it didn't take off. I'm not sure why. I don't remember what was the reason, but it was derived from Linux operating system, I think. But unfortunately, it didn't take off. So I hope we can do something, more on this front, so that we can either develop more, open source technology, either based on already what we had, or maybe learn from these experiences and try to do something more. But I think one of the problem was that it was, government pushed. I mean, for example, that push to develop our own operating system was it was a government initiative. And somehow I feel that in this, this kind of initiative should be taken more by, private enterprises or leading India's leading tech companies rather than government initiative. Because somehow, at the risk of sounding like a skeptic, I just don't feel that government should be dabbling in this field here. But yeah, government can provide an impetus to private tech companies to build a more open source software.
Yeah, Megha.
Yeah.
So what you were saying is absolutely correct. I mean, in terms of the fact that it's not just the government, but it should be a collaborative effort between the government or the public sector, the private sector, academic institutions, and even the small scale startups itself. The technology is being developed at all phases, in terms of at all places also. It's not just big tech conglomerates or the multinational tech companies. You can find a number of startups in Bangalore which are developing critical technologies which can have immense usage and applications in different areas. It can be military, it can be anything, it can be something that the state wants. So this has to be a collaborative effort between different areas of the tech sector itself. It's not just restricted to one. And that's when, when the overall growth happens, and that's when you can actually achieve your objective.
I think what I found interesting is when you said it's highly centralized and the centralization gives the problem. That is exactly the problem with centralization. I remember even in the Soviet Union, they tried to create their own network internet. And because of the high complexity of centralization, they really couldn't take it off, because the internet that we know today is highly decentralized. It's regulated by the users of the internet itself. So, and I think what we mean when we say the role of government is not that the government is trying to push all these technologies or all these regulations, but rather government acts as an entity that safeguards the private interests, right? The role of the state is ultimately to safeguard interests. And I think we think that government should play a similar role in promoting technology, that it should provide an environment that allows for people and companies and societies to actually do what they want freely without facing any sort of harsh regulations. It should be very easy for a company to build new technologies, allow it to go to market without any hindrances, right? We don't want, and when we say early adoption, so our doctrine also mentions early innovation and adoption. When we say that, we don't mean you create technology today, then 5 years later, the government has 2 years later, you finally have got approval or regulation to deploy these technologies in the market. And then by that time, it's already obsolete, right? By the time people have moved on and so on, or the company is lost interest or whatever. The state should really act as a guarantor of people's rights rather than dictating people's rights. If you look at India's, again, technology history, the government has always, the role of the state has always been viewed as governing people's choices. In the very early years, when India was really, we did not have the capacity or it did not have the economic power to import high technology, the mindset of the Indian government was to say that we will change the mindset of the people. We will make sure that people have technologies that is not high tech, but rather it's tech that's used for everyone. I think that mindset should change, and I think that it's high time it should change, because we don't live in an India of the 1940s. We have more capacity, we have more economic progress, and the mindset of the people have also changed. 1940s, 1950s India, a large number of your population was in the villages. Today it's not true. You have innovation even happening in the villages. You have people moving out of villages. So the mindset of the state also has to change, which is also one of the objectives of the doctrine. It's about promoting the role of the people and the government as a regulator, as a guardian of safeguards rights rather than an enforcer of rules.
Yeah. And, lastly, there's one more point which I really liked from the doctrine was to promote technological innovation to address sustainability challenges. I believe India has a lot of potential to offer, and Indian youth especially are, really working in this direction. For example, there is this startup, and I would call it startup, but it's also, initiative by an Indian entrepreneur. It's called Takshashila. It's a very innovative solution to address this, pollution problem and caused due to waste burning in northern parts of India, and they're trying to tackle that by converting that biomass into some activated charcoal. I'm not much heavy on details, but I remember reading about it. They were also awarded, I think, United Nations Champions of the Earth prize. That's when I got to know about it. And when I read about their research, and I had also had an opportunity to talk with the founder of that startup, and I felt amazing. Here's a young person trying to, have a provider or find a practical solution for a problem which India is, and a sustainable solution that too, using technology. So I think there is a hope to hope in India to do more things like that. And it is good to see that approach being included in the doctrine itself. So this has been an interesting conversation. Thank you so much, both of you, Arjun and Pranav, for joining us today. And for our listeners, we'll provide link to the doctrine in description. Thank you, Arjun. Thank you, Pranav.
Thanks, Megha.
Thank you, Megha.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @Takshashila INST or our website takshashila.org.in.
There's a quick survey to fill out on ivmpodcast.com/survey. It lets us know a little bit more about who's listening to us. And you know what? We're going to do a few prizes. So, we'll do a random drawing of maybe 10 people, and we'll send you all some swag. Remember, that's ivmpodcast.com/survey where you can fill out the survey.
We know you love fast food,
fast fashion,
faster payment,
lightning fast internet speed.
Then why not fast information?
On Think Fast, where we discuss the latest developments in the world of technology, business, marketing, pop culture.
With a side of sarcasm and my dad jokes, not just mine.
Not mine, Varun. My jokes are funny. So join me, guys, the funnier one, Suchita Salvan, co-founder of LBB.
And me, Varun Dugirala, the co-founder of The Glitch, as we think fast only on the IVM network.
Fresh episodes out every Wednesday.
On the IVM app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.